Just another brother with another humble question. Just another brother with another humble question.
Welcome to another episode of A Brother with Questions. I am your host, B. Period. Man, I appreciate y'all for joining me. We're going to be reacting to the Club Shay Shay Amanda Seales interview in just a moment. But before I forget, please like, subscribe to the channel, hit the little like button, and then share it. And don't forget to comment, man. That's the only way we grow, man. When you share, when you comment, it lets that algorithm know this is something you want to see. So I appreciate everybody who's doing that every week for me. But let's dive in. So Shannon Sharpe, he interviewed Amanda Seales. Another long one, man. 3 hours they put together. And I'm going to be honest with y'all. I couldn't do 3 hours. I couldn't do 3 hours. I couldn't do 3 hours. I think I did about an hour and a half, but I couldn't do 3 hours. But there was a couple things I saw. And then the aftermath, I want to just we're going to dive in and talk about a little bit. So here she was talking about some of her experiences in school. Let's take a listen.
Amanda is sticking up for other kids in the class. Amanda is correcting me. Like, I had a teacher, Miss Schwenk, who called a conference because she was talking about Aboriginal art. Mm-hmm. And she said that she stood in front of the class and said, that the Aborigines are a Stone Age people. And I was like, ma'am, there are Aboriginals alive right now. Like, they are a part of civilization. Like, what are you talking about? And
okay, so for anybody that didn't quite, like I said, based on where I started it, just so that we're not clear. So we are clear. She's talking about an experience that she had in high school. She went to Dr. Phillips High School in Orlando. I'm familiar with that high school. I grew up in the area as well. And so she's talking about an experience where I guess it must have been some kind of history course. The teacher was talking about the Aborigines, and the teacher misquoted, or at least not misquoted. The teacher was wrong according to how she tells the story. The teacher just was wrong in describing who the Aborigines were. So I'll let her finish, and then I'll come back.
She's like, well, no, what I mean is that they've never advanced. And we're in a classroom in Orlando, Florida. So, like, if we don't check this type of stuff, it's going to just continue. So I was that student. Like, I was the kid who was always raising my hand and just wasn't easily appeased by simply just someone being an authority. Right. And I love this because when she called my mom and said, I'd like to set a conference up because I have some complaints about Amanda. My mom said, well, that's interesting because Amanda has some complaints about you. And so they came.
So, it's interesting. So she's talking about this. And as you'll see in a moment, because I'm going to finish playing the clip. But as you'll see in a moment, it sounds like the teacher was clearly ignorant about who the Aborigines were. That's clear, right? It sounds like she was, I don't know if this was part of the curriculum and she just assumed she knew what to say, and so she didn't say it. But whatever the case may be, it clearly indicates that she was very uneducated about who the Aborigines were. And so as you can see that she corrected the teacher in the middle of the class. That's the one thing I would say about that, is there's a way you do things as a student to the teacher. And especially I'll give it to her, in the high school that she's describing, during the time that she was describing, it started off being a mainly white school because of the neighborhoods that they were pulling from. They were pulling from, at that time, some very affluent neighborhoods. or even if you went and called them affluent, there were certainly affluent people neighborhoods there, and then there was probably that neighborhood where the average person was probably pulling at least 190, 80, 70 grand a year, which at that time, based on when she went to school, that would have been a decent amount of money, especially for your parents. And probably some of those kids may even have one or both parents pulling that kind of money. And so, but it was also a school that, to counterbalance and to bring in that minority element, that particular school also pulled in the lower income students as well. So the quote unquote black population for that school would have been low income. So you kind of had this dynamic of these black kids who, on average, were low income, or at least low to middle class, lower middle class, sort of black people, whose parents, I should say. And then you had these, on the other end, you had these affluent kids. And so I'm not really sure where she was in that mix, but that's kind of what you had going on at that particular school.
We went to the meeting. It was my mom and Mr. Wright and Miss Cersei. It was all black people at Dr. Phillips High School in Orlando, Florida. And this lady sat there, and actually you and Mr. Wright had the same build. And Mr. Wright was like, all right, so, we're here to discuss Amanda disrupting the class with her talking. And she was like, no, Amanda doesn't disrupt the class with her talking. She actually helps the other students out. He's like, oh, okay. So is it about her grades? And she's like, actually, no, one of her art pieces is featured in our exhibit at the library. And he's like, so what are we here for? And she's like, well, she corrects me in front of the class. And these three black people are like, here we go with this racist bullshit, because that's really what it is.
So that's why I want to stop her right there. So she assumes because this teacher had a problem with her, it was because she was black and the teacher was racist. Again, we're talking about her experience. And so I'm going to talk about my experience in being in the classroom. And so I would tell you this. A teacher, if you are going to correct them, there is a way to do it. And if you do it in the wrong way, you're going to have a problem with that teacher. Now, is every teacher going to handle it in the manner in which she's describing her teacher doing it? Not necessarily. But if you're talking about, she describes this one incident, but at the same time, the way the teacher tells the story, it sounds like there were multiple incidents. So if there were multiple incidents, any teacher is probably going to have an issue with that particular student because there's a way to do things. And you can argue, well, if you're wrong, you're wrong. It shouldn't matter. Yeah, I hear you. But knowing teachers, because I have been one before, there's going to be a problem if you are continually, and you can tell from her mannerism, she already has a thing about white people and the assumption that white people are racist. And so, like she says, it was because the teacher was racist and that's why she had a problem with me. But I'd imagine that same teacher would have had a problem with a white kid who always wanted to tell her about how she was wrong about some stuff. And while you can argue, well, she need to be corrected. She might need to be corrected. But that correction really can't come from you because they're more than likely not going to hear it from you. And so there's a better way to get correction without necessarily interrupting her in the middle of her lesson to tell her about how wrong she is in front of the entire class. I'm just saying.
We're in Florida in the 80s and the 90s. And
but let me ask you this.
Okay.
Do you think she would have felt equally as offended if a white kid, because I'm assuming this teacher was white, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a white child would have corrected her, I think most teachers would feel some type of way if a child corrects them.
That's not for me to surmise. I'm just saying that my experience was this lady giving wrong information.
Yeah.
And I'm allowed to correct it. Now, this is the same.
And see, Allow why? Like, who are you, the student, to feel like it's your right, it's your job in the middle of a classroom to tell this lady how wrong she is? And I can just, I don't know who she was as a high school student. I can just see who she is as a 42-year-old, because I had to look it up, because after watching the interview, I was questioning how old she was. But you don't have a right. I could understand you wanting to. I can understand you feeling the need to tell her that she's wrong. But again, there is a way to do that where you can be listened to. And then there's a way to do that where you're going to get a pushback from the teacher. And yes, do I think her mom needed to be called? I think that was a lot. You know, and you could, based on her version of the story, it seems like the principal and everybody else thought it was a lot. But there's nonetheless a way you do things in the year 2000 or whenever she was going to school, and even now. So, but to suggest that, number one, the teacher was racist, and then clearly you can see from how she tells the story, she believes the whole state of Florida is racist, and it's just not true. The whole state of Florida is not racist. Come on, man. But like Shannon Sharpe said, there's a way to do things when a child, because you were a child, ma'am. Regardless of what you thought of yourself, you were a child. There's a way that a child has to address adults in a respectful manner, even when that adult is wrong. Because if you want them to listen to you, there's a way you come at it. And I agree, you mightn't have necessarily knew that lesson as a child, but in telling that story as an adult, you should have at least learned that lesson by now. I'm gonna stop right there because it's 3 hours. Let's get to the aftermath of this video. So she does the 3 hours, and you can see she's annoyed just in that clip about how Shannon was talking to her about the teacher and the pushback and so forth. Well, after the interview, there's another point I should say in the interview where she talks about being autistic, and so after the interview, she's basically had these reflective moments where it sounds like she regrets going on the podcast with Club Shay Shay. And it also sounds like she feels like Shannon was, what does she describe? In this particular post, she described him as interrogating her when she was talking about her autism that she says she has. But as Shannon says, when he asked her, well, have you been diagnosed? And in the interview, you can see the quote here. He says, but have you been clinically diagnosed? She says, yes, there is a clinical diagnosis for autism. So very dismissive when she goes on to describe, because she says she felt like he was interrogating him and not really providing a safe space for her. So now you're blasting him after he allowed you to go on for it. She says some of the video is edited, so he put out 3 hours and 10 minutes. You telling me there's more? So she even did a live about this that I want to just play you a piece of real quick. You're just gonna watch a little bit of the live, and then I have some final comments.
I felt like Shannon was playing in my face. Have you seen his prior interviews? He's very welcoming and bubbly. The door is open. Folks talk uninterrupted. He allows them to be a safe space. The producer told me I would be in a safe space and told me, I would be supported. So that's what I expected.
Man. So it's looking like Shannon Sharpe is getting.
All right, so let's start right there. So in watching what I watched, and then looking at some of these reflective moments that she has, she comes across to me as someone who is definitely bought into this idea of wokeness. And from what I can tell, the way she perceives things. Because she tells a lot of stories about how people not being or being in black spaces, and talks a lot about how she hasn't been protected in the black spaces that she's been in. And she gives multiple examples. She talks about being on the set of Insecure. She talks about going to this particular Black Emmy party, and in these spaces where she thought, because these spaces were being controlled and monitored by Black people, that she'd be safe there and protected there. But finding out that these spaces weren't safe or protected. She even goes on about some of the different, racism and things that are going on or have gone on or she's experienced in life, which all come from not so much, using the high school example, right? It wasn't that the teacher said anything per se that made her think the teacher was racist. It's just that the teacher said something that was incorrect, and it sounded like she said it out of ignorance, which, a lot of teachers do, because a teacher is no different than the person on the street, in the sense that you have you have an education, right, and that qualifies you to be in the classroom. But in all subjects, unfortunately, you may not be well versed in. And there's some subjects where you may assume you know what you're talking about, but you really haven't done the research to really solidify that. And that makes you a bad teacher, but that doesn't necessarily make you a racist. Those are two different issues. Because even when she tells that story, it sounds like the teacher still didn't really know who the Aborigines were. She was making an assumption based off of whatever limited knowledge of those people that she had. But here's the problem that I see with the way she reacted as she told a lot of those stories, the way that she's reacting after the fact, is it's like she's living in this world where if you are a Black person, you are going to always be protected by other Black people. You're always going to be protected wherever Black people are the dominant realm, if you will. And you should not expect to be protected when you're amongst white people, because white people are out to get you. And it's just a matter of time before they reveal themselves as to being the racists that we know that they are. And it's just a negative way to live life, man. Because two things are true. Everybody I know that is successful, number one, there's usually a white man or a white woman that has given them a leg up to put them in position to be there. So what that lets me know is that all white people aren't racist. That's number one. And that's not to say I don't believe that they don't exist. I do believe they exist, but I don't think they are the dominant. Number two, life at 42, you have to know at 42 that every Black person ain't your friend, and every Black person ain't out to help you get to the next level. And that's okay. You know what I'm saying? I'm not even mad at the fact that there's some Black people that don't want to see me succeed, because it's a part of life. In life, there are going to be Black people, there are going to be white people, there are going to be Asian people, there are going to be Europeans that love me, and there are going to be all of those people that don't like me. But what I can't do is live in this woke world where I expect that every Black person has my good intentions at heart, and then be shocked when I find out that, oh my gosh, I can't believe in this Black space that I wasn't being protected. What are you talking about? First of all, there's no such thing as a Black space. There's a thing as Black people being in a place, but there's no such thing as Black spaces where we're all protected. What does that even mean? And as a 42-year-old woman who's lived in this world for 42 years, you have to know that, number one, not everybody's out to get you. Not all white people are racist. And not all black people don't have your best interests at heart. And that's okay. There is a level of just being an adult that I think we get to, and we realize that we find out very quickly the people that love us and the people that don't. And we embrace those that love us. And quite frankly, for me, I embrace those that don't, in the sense that I'm not bothered by them. I'm okay. And I move on. But I don't let them influence my life, because I recognize that they don't have any influence over my life. And I just want to, because there's a lot of people out there that are championing her, dogging Shannon. Shannon did what Shannon does. He asks questions and he lets you talk. So anything you say, and you said 3 hours worth of it ain't because you didn't want to. Especially being, you're talking about somebody who's been interviewing people for over 20 years. So now, yes, you're on the other end of that. But you've got 20 years of experience of interviewing people. I would think in 20 years, you've learned, if there's something you don't want to say, you learn how to not say it. In 20 years as being an interviewer, if you see an interview is not quite going the way that you want, you know how to curb it. In 20 years of being an interviewer, you've had to learn something to be able to pivot when something ain't going your way. And if you talk for 3 hours, I don't want to hear after the fact that somehow you were tricked, that you were wrong, that you were whatever you want to call it. Because after 3 hours, you said a whole lot. And you meant every word of it, I imagine. So don't come back and tell me you were tricked. That wasn't a safe space. Because if that ain't a safe space to talk for 3 hours uninterrupted, mainly, then what is? And on that note, I'm B. Period, and I'm out.